The fluorescent lights of Fulton County Superior Court buzzed with an artificial hum. I sat at the defense table, enduring Judge Ronald Miller's absolute, heavy contempt. He treated me not as a professional, but as a common criminal. Across the aisle stood my husband of 11 years, Christopher, wearing a premium suit I had purchased for him. He pointed me out with clinical coldness, labeling me an unfaithful wife in a calculated bid to strip away my business assets. His smug attorney called their surprise witness to the stand, leaving me only seconds to steel my resolve before my reputation was publicly executed. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. To understand the execution taking place in that courtroom, you have to understand the balance sheet of our marriage. I did not inherit Meridian Restoration. I built my historical architecture firm from the ground up, and every single brick was laid with my own hands. It started at our tiny kitchen island with a second-hand MacBook and $12,000 of my own depleted savings. I remember the early days, staring at blueprints until my vision blurred, calculating profit margins to the penny just to keep the lights on. Every dollar I reinvested into the firm was a dollar I bled for. While Christopher slept comfortably in the next room, I stayed awake drafting complex proposals, analyzing arcane municipal preservation codes, and fighting tooth and nail for every early contract. Over a grueling decade of unrelenting focus, I transformed that desperate, quiet hustle into a massive corporate asset, generating $760,000 a year. It was not luck or magic. It was relentless, methodical work, quantified by sleepless nights and unyielding discipline. Christopher, meanwhile, coasted through life as a mid-level corporate compliance manager. He brought in a respectable $115,000 a year, but his salary had completely stagnated for half a decade. He deeply resented my financial dominance. He viewed my overwhelming success not as a partnership or a shared victory, but as a direct, daily insult to his fragile ego. I was out-earning him exponentially, and the financial asymmetry entirely poisoned his perception of our relationship. He felt entitled to the harvest but despised the farmer. The arrival of Matthew Vance only amplified his silent, simmering rage. Matthew was a master structural craftsman, a highly sought-after artisan whose unique expertise was absolutely critical to our larger, more prestigious restoration projects. I hired him at a strictly non-negotiable rate of $650 a day. Every single interaction I had with Matthew was clinically documented and strictly professional to the core. We did not share coffee dates, casual lunches, or personal anecdotes. We shared strict preservation codes, load-bearing capacities, and material sourcing logistics. Our professional relationship was bound by rigid engineering specifications and an exhaustive, unimpeachable paper trail. But Christopher did not see a master craftsman contributing to our net worth. He saw a profound threat to his masculinity. He saw a weapon he could leverage to dismantle my empire and take what he believed he was owed. I had been the silent investor in his illusion of a happy, traditional family, constantly absorbing his passive aggression and footing the massive bill for his comfortable lifestyle. Now, looking at him in that courtroom, I realized our relationship had just been a long-term subscription service. He was planning to forcibly liquidate my life's work to fund his independence. I did not cry when I realized what he was doing. I did not ask why or beg for an explanation. Anger was not loud or chaotic this time. It was an accounting error I was calmly preparing to correct. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and his column was about to be zeroed out. He completely forgot about the ironclad postnuptial agreement I had forced him to sign 5 years ago when Meridian Restoration first crossed the $500,000 mark. At the time, he gladly signed it in exchange for me clearing his mounting credit card debts and funding his luxury lifestyle, never imagining the clause we embedded. Any verified act of corporate espionage or bad faith financial sabotage against the firm would immediately trigger a total, unconditional forfeiture of his marital property rights. He thought he was playing a game of emotional warfare, but he had already signed away his right to my empire if he ever tried to burn it down. The hostility did not arrive all at once in a dramatic explosion of rage. It was a slow, deliberate, and freezing deterioration of our environment, a systemic protocol designed to make me feel completely isolated and entirely unwelcome in my own home. This is the insidious, creeping nature of domestic sabotage. It is the trap of cruel normalization, where the psychological environment slowly degrades, and you are expected to simply adapt to the chilling drop in emotional temperature. Everyday spaces become loaded with unspoken malice, hiding systemic emotional cruelty behind a veil of ordinary, mundane routines. The abuser relies on this gradual shift, so you never realize you are freezing to death until the ice has already formed over your reality. I remember returning home late one evening after finalizing a highly complex municipal permit for a downtown historical site. My mind was exhausted, craving the simple peace of my own house. I walked in to find Christopher standing rigidly by the kitchen island. His phone was placed face down on the cool granite countertop. His posture was unnaturally stiff, and his face held a carefully arranged, entirely artificial expression, a mask of detached, clinical superiority. He did not ask about my day. He did not acknowledge my presence. He simply watched me with a hollow, calculating stare that communicated pure, unfiltered contempt. He was actively testing my boundaries, running a psychological diagnostic to assess exactly how much quiet hostility I would tolerate before my composure shattered. But the ultimate line was crossed a few weeks later. It was a brutal evening in mid-January, and the outside temperature had plummeted to a bitter, unforgiving 12 degrees, driving a freezing sleet across the city. I walked through the front door, fully expecting the familiar, comforting weight of my German shepherd, Shadow, leaning enthusiastically against my legs. Instead, the house was dead, silent, and unnervingly still. I dropped my briefcase and searched the rooms until I found Shadow locked outside on the freezing concrete patio. Ice was already forming on his heavy winter coat, and he was pouring desperately and shivering violently against the sliding glass door. Christopher was sitting comfortably in the living room a few feet away, casually scrolling through his tablet. He was perfectly aware of the dog's profound distress. He had intentionally crossed a hard boundary, weaponizing my deep affection for an innocent animal to completely destabilize my mental state. He wanted a dramatic reaction. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to prove to him that I was emotionally erratic and weak. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I calmly unlocked the door, brought my freezing dog inside, wrapped him securely in a heavy thermal blanket, and stood up to look directly at my husband. I felt absolutely no panic in my chest. I felt no despair or heartbreak. I rubbed my tired eyes trying to summon some lingering regret, but there was only absolute, terrifying clarity. This was no longer a marriage, it was a hostile takeover. My home had become a battlefield, and I needed to immediately prepare my structural defenses. The initial formal strike came through a sterile, strictly professional phone call. My legal counsel, Amanda Sterling, possessed a sharp, clinical, and uncompromising demeanor that left absolutely no room for panic or emotional indulgence. Her voice was perfectly flat, a rehearsed corporate warning delivered with surgical precision. Christopher's legal team had just submitted a massive, aggressive, supplemental exhibit list to the court. It was densely packed with private investigator reports, detailed daily surveillance logs, and hundreds of invasive photographs documenting my every professional move. Amanda told me to brace myself for a total character assassination on the public stage. I calmly hung up the phone and retreated to the secure silence of my office floor. I locked the heavy oak door and sat in the dark, letting the stark reality of his calculated betrayal wash over my senses. I needed to understand the architecture of his exact strategy. I opened my primary laptop and began aggressively auditing my own network backend. I bypassed his superficial, fabricated accusations of infidelity and dug directly into the secure server access logs for Meridian restoration. That was when I discovered the true, horrifying extent of his sabotage. Christopher had not just stumbled into this divorce out of misplaced jealousy. He had been meticulously planning my complete financial execution for several consecutive months. The encrypted logs revealed a systematic, daily extraction of critical business data. He had been quietly, persistently leaking Meridian Restoration's proprietary architectural blueprints, our confidential vendor bids, and our highly specialized historical restoration specifications to rival preservation groups across the entire state. He was actively and intentionally destroying my competitive advantage in the marketplace, deliberately draining my corporate cash reserves by ensuring I lost major municipal contracts. His goal was clear. He wanted to bleed my accounts completely dry, ensuring I would be entirely vulnerable, underfunded, and desperate before he triggered his spectacular courtroom trap. This was not merely domestic betrayal or a breakdown of marital vows. It was calculated, predatory corporate espionage executed from inside my own home. He assumed I was far too deeply focused on my external restoration projects to ever monitor the administrative network backend. He foolishly mistook my professional silence for domestic ignorance. He thought I was just a woman working late, not a chief executive guarding an empire. They were not going to be shocked by what they had done. They were going to be utterly shocked that I had stopped playing along. I did not waste a single useless second wondering how the man I loved could do this to me. That man was a carefully constructed fiction, a ghost I was done mourning. I methodically downloaded every single timestamp, every tracked IP address, and every unauthorized transfer protocol. I printed the massive data logs. I cross-referenced the transmission dates with my lost contract bids. I built an impenetrable, undeniable fortress of documentation. The emotional bleed stopped instantly. I was no longer a betrayed, heartbroken wife. I was a structural architect inspecting a critically compromised foundation, ready to initiate a controlled, devastating demolition of his entire life. The narrative loops violently back to the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light of courtroom 6C. Philip Greer, Christopher's excessively smug and theatrical attorney, was pacing in front of the judge with the unearned confidence of a man who believes he has already won. He dramatically presented a series of heavily cropped, intentionally manufactured surveillance photographs to the court. The grainy images clearly showed Matthew Vance and me walking side by side through the grand revolving doors of a luxury hotel in Midtown Atlanta. Greer aggressively, loudly declared for the official record that on the evening of March 14th, we had checked into this premium hotel together to consummate a deeply illicit affair. I watched from the cold wood of the defense table as Christopher beamed with profound, sickening pride. He looked like a man who had just secured a winning lottery ticket, completely oblivious to the trap snapping shut around his own ankle. A low, toxic murmur of judgment rippled through the crowded public gallery seated behind us. The air in the courtroom felt thick and heavy, with my impending highly public ruin. But I remained completely and utterly still. I did not shift in my chair. I did not break eye contact. I relied entirely on the cold, rigid, structural discipline of my extensive architectural training. I knew exactly what had happened on the night of March 14th. We were not there for a romantic, forbidden rendezvous. We were scheduled to deliver a critical, multi-million-dollar infrastructure presentation to the City Council early the following morning. 2 hours before midnight, a massive, unannounced power grid failure blacked out our entire block, completely crashing our local servers and corporate network. With the electronic bidding portal closing exactly at dawn, we rushed to that specific Midtown Atlanta hotel solely to utilize their independent, fiber optic-powered 24-hour executive business center to securely finalize and upload our encrypted engineering models. I did not panic as Greer continued his obnoxious, booming monologue. Resting quietly, perfectly squared on the table directly in front of me was a thick, heavily tabbed white binder. Inside that reinforced binder were 47 distinct, unassailable pieces of undeniable documentation, cross-referenced with a certified, tamper-proof digital forensic image of our corporate network logs on a secure drive. I had secured the Hotel Business Center's official digital sign-in logs. I had the time-stamped itemized financial receipts for the emergency technical support services we utilized. I had the frantic, heavily documented email chains sent directly from the hotel's verified IP address directly to the secure City Council's server. I had the precise geolocated metadata extracted from my encrypted backup drives. I had every single receipt, interaction, and physical movement securely catalogued and verified by an independent cybersecurity expert. Greer was busy constructing a massive, fragile house of cards in the middle of a courtroom, blissfully unaware that I was quietly sitting there holding a heavy, steel wrecking ball. I did not interrupt his performance. I let him paint his masterpiece of complete fiction, allowing Christopher to gorge himself on the delicious anticipation of my total defeat. I knew from years of studying structural integrity that the higher they built their elaborate lie, the more devastating and absolute the final collapse would be. When Matthew Vance finally took the witness stand, he moved with an unbreakable, deeply stoic calm that immediately altered the frequency of the room. He did not look like a guilty man, cornered by a high-priced corporate lawyer. He looked exactly like a master craftsman, calmly inspecting a critically flawed, poorly built wall. Greer immediately launched into his hostile, manipulative line of questioning, attempting to aggressively back Matthew into a fabricated public confession of adultery. Instead of answering the rapid-fire accusations, Matthew looked directly past the lawyer, locking eyes with Judge Ronald Miller, and politely requested formal permission to submit a new piece of audio evidence. He calmly and clearly explained that the recording was captured entirely legally under the strict one-party consent laws of the state of Georgia. The judge, his judicial curiosity heavily piqued by the sudden shift in demeanor, formally granted the request. Matthew reached into his pocket, retrieved his phone, and firmly pressed play. Christopher's voice instantly flooded the dead silence of the courtroom. The digital audio was terrifyingly crystal clear. It was Christopher, sounding desperate, greedy, and unhinged, explicitly offering Matthew a massive $45,000 cash bribe. On the undisputed recording, Christopher forcefully instructed Matthew to be intentionally vague and misleading on the witness stand. He clearly, undeniably admitted that he knew the affair was a complete and total lie, but he desperately needed the fabricated leverage to steal exactly half of my architecture firm. The pathetic illusion of my husband's dominance shattered instantly into a million pieces. It exposed the stark, undeniable reality of the empty wallet power illusion. This is a common architectural flaw in abusive dynamics. Men like Christopher, who entirely lack genuine professional competence and actual financial weight, often attempt to project a facade of immense power by terrorizing those who actually hold the real resources. His entire aggressive strategy was built on a desperate, hollow bluff, a pathetic facade of authority masking deep, systemic financial insecurity and a profound lack of actual, tangible leverage. He was an empty shell, demanding to be treated like a fortress. The moment his true, pathetic extortion plot echoed loudly through the cavernous room, the power flip was absolute, immediate, and total. I sat perfectly still and watched the blood rapidly drain from Christopher's smug face, leaving his skin a sickening, pale, grey-white color. His unearned confidence evaporated into thin air, instantly replaced by raw, unadulterated legal terror. He looked wildly at his attorney for salvation, but Greer was frozen in absolute shock, realizing his career was now in jeopardy. The oppressive, heavy contempt that Judge Ronald Miller had aimed entirely at me swung completely, a full 180 degrees, locking directly onto Christopher like a guided missile. The judge's eyes narrowed into a terrifying, laser-focused glare of righteous judicial fury. The carefully orchestrated trap had violently sprung shut, but it had entirely consumed its arrogant architect. This was not emotional revenge. It was a precise, catastrophic, and completely legal accounting correction. The legal system delivered absolute and crushing consequences over the next 6 rapid weeks. Philip Greer immediately dropped Christopher as a client, desperate to completely distance himself from the radioactive fallout of a documented criminal extortion attempt. Left defenseless, Christopher was forced to hire a new, incredibly quiet attorney who quickly surrendered, settling for total, undisputed asset preservation in my favor. I kept 100% of Meridian Restoration. I kept all of my lucrative, hard-won municipal contracts, and I easily maintained full, unshared ownership of my Midtown Atlanta lease. The sprawling, expensive Victorian house we shared in Inman Park was quickly sold, the financial equity coldly divided and permanently severed. Christopher did not escape the brutal machinery of the criminal justice system either. Judge Miller had immediately referred the damning audio evidence straight to the Fulton County District Attorney. Within weeks, Christopher was formally indicted by a grand jury and swiftly convicted of felony witness, tampering a charge that resulted in strict, multi-year probation and a series of crushing, insurmountable criminal fines that effectively and permanently bankrupted him. He had gambled his entire existence on a pathetic lie, and he lost absolutely everything. I packed up my loyal dog, Shadow, and moved into a massive, sunlit, modern loft apartment located in the old Fourth Ward of Atlanta. The space was entirely mine, completely free of his toxic, paranoid surveillance and calculated, quiet cruelty. It was a brilliant blank canvas, structurally sound, and bathed daily in warm, natural light. Cultivating a new dawn requires far more than just surviving the suffocating darkness of betrayal. It demands the conscious, highly deliberate act of designing an entirely new reality, one where your personal boundaries are reinforced with industrial steel and your peace is fiercely, relentlessly protected. Rebuilding a life is not just about clearing away the ugly wreckage of a toxic, parasitic partnership. It is about establishing an emotional and financial foundation so incredibly solid that no one can ever threaten your stability again. I have come to realize that surviving a predatory, calculated attack does not leave you permanently broken, it leaves you fiercely illuminated. Forgiveness is not always a gift you give to the other person. Sometimes, it is simply the only logical way to set yourself entirely free from their decaying heavy gravity. I realize now that the pain was just the cost of admission to my true potential. I am no longer defined by the trauma he tried to build around me. I am defined by the peace I chose to construct in its place. I do not look back with lingering anger or sorrow anymore. I look around my beautiful, quiet, and profoundly safe life with immense, overwhelming gratitude. I built this, and no one will ever take it away. If this blueprint of absolute justice showed you the power of owning your own reality, share this video right now with someone who desperately needs the courage to build an unbreakable boundary today. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below with the word receipt to show you know exactly how to protect your own reality. Let's make sure the truth always keeps its records.